Thank you, Hagen. All right, we have one more speaker and we'll have a panel discussion. So I do encourage you guys to please, if you have questions that you want to ask the panel, write them down. Unfortunately, as you know, we have some speakers that had to leave early, but we'll have still a few here to answer questions. Our last speaker, and thank you everyone for staying and for staying to the end here, is Debbie Higginbotham, who's a friend of Bear Witness Central. She's spoken to us before, and we want to welcome her again. Please, Debbie. Finish talking.
Thank you so much. It has been, I appreciate all the patience of Rolando and all of those putting this conference on. It's been amazing. And the patience of me not being able to be here throughout the day. I have heard some wonderful stories of the speakers ahead of me this morning that were absolutely amazing. I wish I could have been here. But as you may all know, I am the mom of 7 children, so that pretty much occupies my life and my day. So again, thank you again for the opportunity. Again, my name is Debbie Higginbotham. I'm a longtime resident here of Florida. My husband and I have been married for almost 16 years now, and we are raising our 7 children in Clay County. And one of the things I really rarely ever get the opportunity to do, and if you just bear with me for just 1 second, is to thank my husband. And for all of you who know me, you always see me, come here honey, you always see me with my kids, but you never see my better half. And my better half is with me today, and I'm so honored. He is my backbone, and he is the driving force, and he works so hard to enable me to stay at home and raise our children, and I'm just so honored to have him by my side all the time, so thank you very much. Also, another plea of forgiveness. Usually those who come and have heard me speak, I usually just kind of go off the cuff and I can just rattle things on, and I do a really pretty good job, I think. But we're going to cover the topic of air, and that's one of the topics that's really got a lot of tentacles to it, and I have to make sure that I'm going to give you the right information, so I'm going to be doing a lot of reading today, so forgive me on that. But as we know, as we've been talking about mostly here today, is the Common Core State Standards and how we got there. Part of it was Race to the Top. And in Race to the Top, there's going to be testing mechanisms that have to be done in the classroom. And through Race to the Top, at the time, there were 2 testing consortia that were states could join. That was PARC and the SVAC. Well, we're going to get into that a little bit. Well, as you know, we no longer have PARC, and we're going to get into that in just a minute as well. Now the state of Florida has AIR, the American Institutes for Research. So AIR is one of the largest behavioral and social research groups in the world. And the first phrase of that, being a social and behavioral research group, is very alarming. We didn't hire a testing company to be socially development and testing behavioral tendencies of our children. We want them to test the knowledge and what they're learning in the classrooms. So when you look at the word institutes, the plural institutes is no accident. From inception, AIR has been the beneficiary of hundreds of federal grants and contracts. Along with the federal government, AIR has multiple partners. Nothing in AIR's contracts prevents them from sharing our children's data with federal agencies, their multiple partners, and their multiple institutes. AIR's federal clients include, now this is getting kind of scary, Office of Elementary and Secondary Education, the Office of Innovation and Improvement, Office of Planning, Evaluation and Policy Development, Office of Post-Secondary Education, Office of Safe and Drug-Free Schools, Office of Special Education and Rehabilitative Services, the Federal Student Aid, Institute of Education Sciences, and the National Center for Education and Statistics. So that's a lot. AIR has its hand in a lot. AIR's mission is to conduct and apply the best behavioral and social science research and evaluation towards improving people's lives with a special emphasis on the disadvantaged. Now please understand that AIR is so deep and so much that, again, I can't cover everything. So I'm going to give you just a skim of it, but you can go to their website, which is AIR.org, and you can find all of this information on their website and where they're involved and how they're involved and how long they've been involved in all of this. I'm going to do a brief history here now. Since 1965, AIR's had tremendous influence on education policy and reform. The first major intervention in education began through President Lyndon Johnson's Elementary and Secondary Education Act in 1965. Through all the tried education reforms since then, such as the creation of the Department of Education in 1979, A Nation at Risk in 1983, and then Bill Clinton's American School Act of 1994, No Child Left Behind in 2002, and On It to Race to the Top in 2009, AIR has been behind it all. AIR has always been there shaping the policies firsthand. It'd be hard to go into detail on how they were involved in every single attempt, but please be assured that AIR has had many of its programs included. Most recently, with Race to the Top, some of AIR's programs that were involved are AIR's Assessments Program, the analysis of the longitudinal data and educational research programs, the Health and Social Development Program, International Development, Evaluation and Research Programs, Workforce and Lifelong Learning Program. All of these programs played some role in implementing the 4 pillars of the Race to the Top grant, which are standards and assessments, data systems, great teachers and leaders, and turnaround schools. Let us also mention that AIR has also been involved in the No Child Left Behind waiver process. We all know that No Child Left Behind was set up to fail from the beginning, as one of the goals was that 100% of students tested in reading and math would reach grade level by 2014. Even Mr. Edward Kennedy said himself, and I'm going to quote this, he said, "The idea of 100% as in any legislation is not achievable. There isn't a member of Congress or a parent or student that doesn't understand that." So in 2012, after the Race to the Top grant, Education Secretary Arne Duncan decided to issue waivers to all states to get out of the No Child Left Behind 100% proficiency by 2014 requirements. As part of that waiver, states could choose one of 2 options for the standards piece of the 4 reform pillars that were mandated to qualify for the waiver. Option number 1, we'll call it option A actually. Adopt college and career ready standards common to a significant number of states. Sound familiar? The Department of Education clarified this would be 15 states. This was the same recommendation in the Race to the Top application that garnered extra points. So if you remember, the states, when they applied for the Race to the Top contract grants, they got the extra points if they agreed to adopt the Common Core set of standards. Sound familiar? And then the other option was the college and career ready standards certified by a committee of people from the state's higher education institutions. So they chose, instead of getting less money, they wanted to get more money, so that's where your Common Core state standards got adopted, and the states who adopted them got more money. The waivers have become the enforcement arm in the adoption of Common Core, and it isn't a coincidence that the only national set of standards that were touted as career and college ready were the Common Core state standards. Now, when Indiana recently pulled away from the Common Core, the waiver was threatened. Now, recently in Washington, Arne Duncan pulled their No Child Left Behind waiver. Now, as more states feel burdened with the waiver mandates, more states are struggling and to determine whether or not the cost of the waiver compliance exceed any benefits. Ours has been pulled, I believe, our state waiver. Did I put that in there? I may put that in there. So the importance of the waiver has become a critical component of recent educational reform. It really is the avenue through which states are tied to Common Core and Common Core aligned assessments. So did AIR play a role in all of this? It most certainly has. Not only did AIR have key people with links to the Department of Education as a part of the actual evaluation of the individual state waivers, they were also the ones providing input to the Department of Education and also evaluating the process. So you've got these waivers that states are applying for the No Child Left Behind. Everyone pretty much on the board at AIR have got links to the Department of Education who are reviewing all the waivers. So AIR is doing the assessments, they're doing the waiver process, there's more and more people involved through AIR than you would not believe than just assessments. So another thing that struck me is the involvement of the AIR in the international tests such as NAEP and PISA. AIR's experts have provided technical and analytical support for U.S. participation in PISA, including consultation and management support. So here's another avenue that AIR is involved in. It's involved in the U.S.'s participation in all these international tests. AIR's experts have provided technical and analytical research support for the participation in the TEMS test, including consultation and management support, technical review of statistical reports, data files and data documentation, expert analysis, technical support for the development of web-based data tools and other products. The list just goes on and on. It's alarming how well AIR has been and had their hand in so many things throughout our education reform. So at this point, let's take a step back and let's see where AIR is in on so many parts of education. Benchmarking. We all heard about that benchmarking for success term. Okay, well, AIR's involved in that too, sorry. It's working with the national and international organizations to benchmark U.S. tests against international tests. VAM. How many of you heard of VAM? The value-added model. It's what the teachers are being based off of when teaching to the Common Core State Standards. From the outset, AIR has been a significant contributor to the research and early implementation work surrounding student growth in the value-added model. Florida has already paid them $4 million for the teacher evaluation system being used to evaluate teachers according to the students' test scores. They're involved in the universal preschool. You notice how the age for preschool is getting younger and younger? Yep, AIR's involved in that too. College rankings, financial aid. They were involved in writing an article, and you can find it, I think, on their website. Financial aid in the line between college and work was a paper published by the National Center for Analysis of Longitudinal Data and Education Research, and it was co-authored by AIR. So they're into the financial, they're into internet usage in schools, working with teachers unions, school and safety plans. AIR's got it all. They've got it all covered. So now, let's look at the assessment side of things, and this is where Janet talking about the iPad is going to come into play as well. The assessment side of things in relating to Common Core. Right now, AIR is developing the Florida test, and it's contracted for $220 million, and it's going to span about 6 years. And the per student costs are actually going to go down from $36.17 to $34.23. The nonprofit based in Washington, D.C. will work with Data Recognition Corporation to develop the test content and score student responses. And also, Florida is paying the state of Utah, which is using AIR as well, for some of the test items, and they're paying them $5.4 million. So isn't it just so reassuring that we're paying another state and a testing agency millions and millions and millions of dollars to do something that easily Florida could do on its own? Another key thing that is interesting here, AIR is also developing the Smarter Balanced Consortium in producing their test. And if you notice that the Smarter Balance Consortium, they have a cooperative agreement with the Federal Department of Education, and that means that any of the states that have partnered with the Smarter Balance Consortium, their data, the students' data, will go to the Smarter Balance Consortium, but also has to go to the Federal Department of Education in Washington, D.C. So in one of their presentations, this is what AIR admits to the Common Core State Standards. Many of them have mandates and there's federal strings attached, and they will be testing based on Common Core. The Common Core State Standard mandates that students' learning outcomes for every grade level. Students will be tested and instructional effectiveness will be measured based on Common Core. Federal funding is tied to Common Core adoption, implementation, and accountability. So the English language arts and the mathematics right now are the only ones that are going to be tested. But we all know in this room that there are more parts coming, and that's one of the ones, science is one of the ones that's getting ready to come out and be released and be implemented in our classrooms. Civics and social studies are right behind it. I'm sure everyone knows about the David Coleman and redoing the College Board, AP US History, and things are being changed with that. Yeah, that's going to be part of AIR as well. Now, AIR didn't start doing standardized testing until around 2007. When we talk about testing, we have to talk about our children's data. But let me back up for just 1 second. The assessments all have to be done online in front of computers. And when Janet was here talking about the iPad usage, that's going to be used as well. And there's no way for the parents to even see the test questions, how they scored, even with the curriculum being done on the iPads. The parents can't go in and start reviewing all of the test books on the iPads. And when some moms are calling publishers and asking and demanding hardback covers and written print of the textbooks that are being used in some of these schools, they're not letting them, they're not giving them to parents. They call the publishers directly. I want a copy of this. No, I'm sorry, we can't send that to you. So again, when your students are being behind that iPad constantly, they're actually just, there's doing so much more damage to those children's brains than you would ever believe. And Janet made a good point on how much screen time. Everyone for so long has been iterating read to your children, read to your children, read the books, put the books in front of them. And now all they want you to do is put what in front of them? The iPod, the iPad, the Xbox, all of that kind of stuff. And where are children going? That's the first thing they look to whenever they walk into a room. What's the one that, it was funny, my kids went out of town. What was the first thing they looked for in the hotel room? Television. The television, yeah. So given the already terrifying weak privacy protection in the Family Education Right to Privacy Act, AIR is collecting data on our children. Where are they housing it? They're housing it. That Florida already relies upon them, and that allows so much private data and teacher data to be given without consent to research organizations like AIR without parental consent. This breach is very concerning. AIR should not be the contract company for Florida. The reason being, as I just stated here, there was a breach in their own employee data information, and they couldn't keep their employees' data safe. So information, AIR, okay, I gotta go through the breach here. One of the things that AIR wants to do is AIR wants to track children from preschool to high school and from high school to college and college into the workforce. AIR wants to track them and wants to build high-performing students track the high-performing students to the teachers and the teachers to their schools of education. AIR also wants to see more states build comprehensive systems that track students from pre-K to college and then link the school data to the workforce data. So in my eyes, this is very alarming. So what are they tracking on our kids? Everything except social security numbers and biometric information. There was a law that passed in the recent Florida legislation saying that they couldn't ask for social security numbers, but they couldn't collect on biometric information. But there's 397 points of information that they're still collecting and in housing into databases as well. And you don't know who they're sharing the information with. So be aware of that as well. I'm going to also mention that if I haven't before, the Race to the Top assessment contracts dictate that all data from the assessments be provided to the Federal Department of Education. So the results aren't just going back to the counties and when they take these assessments. All this personal information on our students is all going to the Federal Department of Education. So when Governor Scott issued his executive order back in September of 2013 and removing Florida from the park assessment, he put us even in a worse situation. The executive order called for a competitive solicitation for new academic assessments to be used in Florida's public schools, and I took that straight from his executive order. That left us with Pam Stewart being left with her to make the decision of what contract company we were going to use, and she chose AIR. And that decision came down in March of 2014. So as of this year, AIR is going to be conducting all the testing and assessments on our students and replacing the FPAT. So if you hated the FPAT, you are definitely going to be hating all the assessments going to be provided by this. And there is going to be more testing and assessments done on our children throughout the year in the public school system. So in closing, I have a couple things that I'm just going to say personally about this, and I have it written down because I'm going to kind of quote a really great university professor, Chris Tinkin, and he wrote some great words, and I want to share them with you. AIR is a huge, huge beast, and we all know that Common Core is another huge beast, and they're a huge beast that we have got to tackle, and we can only tackle it together. So in closing, for nearly 50 years of growing federal intervention in education hasn't proved outcomes. Instead of continuing to increase programs and spending, it's time to restore state and local decision-making in education. And most importantly, it's time to empower every family with the freedom to choose the education that meets their children's unique learning needs. It's clear even before the Common Core standards took its current form, main developing organizations, the CCSSO, the NGA, and Achieve, were influencing developing educational national policy. What nobody wants looking at is that the American Institutes for Research and their untold influence and under-the-radar partnerships for years have truly been rewriting how education should be employed throughout the nation. They pretty much have been under the blind eye, sneaking in. They have set up the framework for national standards and are players in curriculum and now leaders in assessment development. Philanthropists like the Gates, Jeb Bush, and the Waltons were already using their millions to encourage the vision, their educational agenda based on privatizing education. Big business had already built a culture of closed-door influence with these developing organizations. It was a perfect storm in 2009 when Obama took office, and they capitalized on it. Big business and philanthropists supported it, and they funded it. States cowered due to the insufficient funding in their own respective states and opened the door for more federal funding, and in the same breath, for those that entered into the Race to the Top agreements, began to chip away at state sovereignty, but then when the decision to enter Race to the Top and adopt the Common Core state standards, and it circumvented our state legislature. It is important to note that many ties between the federal government are not just in the partnerships, but also in the people that have served both. We need to ask ourselves this: if there has been such an instrumental part of collecting and analyzing data since the Elementary and Secondary Education Act of 1965, then why have student scores have stayed flat? Their narrative and the compounding legislation that followed have done little to truly fix the issues in education. But has the data really told us? My data tells me that we are listening to the wrong people. Parental and teacher instincts tell us that kids need an education that focuses on concrete concepts and foundational information, free of political bias and unfounded philosophies. It's time to get back to the basics and really focus on how kids learn. Over the last 50 years, there's been a degradation of parental rights. States and now the federal government are micromanaging our teachers and our schools through data that apparently can be used to tell a particular story. A couple of things to leave you with to think over. There's no reliable, independently validated, empirical support for the Common Core initiative, and yet many policymakers and educators support it. It's an attractive idea to support because it limits the intricacies of real issues and makes it easy to lay the blame at the foot of a system, public education, that reacts to society rather than drives it. The Common Core initiative compartmentalizes, I can never say that, even though I love using the word, complexity, and compartmentalizes messy issues, allows people to be intellectually lazy. Developing coherent education and social policies is more difficult. The vendors of the Common Core standards present the standardization of America's children as a neat and clean solution, easily manageable and easy to discuss. Unfortunately, the real world is not so organized, and that is so much cognitively complicated. Believing that we can eliminate the complexity of educating all students by putting forth superficial ideas like a one-size-fits-all standard is like believing rankings on an international test really means something. It seems anti-intellectual and based on the lack of evidence, unethical to support such a massive social experiment, using participants who have no choice but to go along. The evidence suggests that there's not a crisis in education. There's a crisis in education leadership at all levels. Those who perpetuate bad ideas based on flawed data are practicing poor leadership. If some school leaders and their organizations do not want to stand up for children, then they should stand down and let those who are willing and assume the leadership reins. School leaders do not have to conduct the research on these topics, but at least they should read it and dig below the surface of it and understand it. Children have a right to a quality education, and school leaders, those who prepare them, and the people who lead their professional organizations have a duty to help provide the quality. If some education leaders choose to drink the snake oil, then they should expect to get sick. If some help sell it, they should resign. Children, and our children, do not have a seat at the policy-making table. Policy is thrust upon them, not created with them. They are helpless to defend themselves against poor decision-making. They do not have a voice. They have only the voices of the adults who are supposed to know better, and that's us. Thank you again for allowing me to speak here today about AIR and the destruction they are having on the hearts and minds of our children, and the teachers who have bravely picked up the torch to try and make a difference in their lives. Take the time to educate yourselves on Common Core and Race to the Top. You can visit our website at floridaparentsrise.org. We're trying to update all the time, but please be patient with us. We're just moms, and we're trying to stay diligent on all the things that are happening with this. I encourage all of you to get involved in your local school board. Know who your school board members are. If it's an election cycle, know who's running for office and who opposes Common Core and Race to the Top. And let's get those people on the board and make sure that they're going to be willing to walk to Tallahassee with you and march there and push back on Tallahassee, saying that we will not take this anymore. We will not thrust it upon our children, and we will not place them in the harms of this child abuse, which is Common Core, the curriculum and the testing and the assessments that go on with it. You need to start talking to other parents about this. Do they know what's going on in the children's classroom? Educate them. There are many of us that are educated on this, and there are many of us who would love to come into your homes and educate the ones that are not educated on this. We must fight this together, no matter party affiliation, race, color, or creed. In my opinion, America is the best nation on earth. I'm going to work hard, as our founding fathers have put forth, for us to go and preserve it. And I will say this, and I'm going to quote my brother on this. He is a United States Marine. He is stationed out in Camp Pendleton. And he says, this garbage is not what I get up every morning and fight for. He is a man who has done multiple tours in Iraq, and I'm very proud of him. But it breaks my heart to have a man break like that, knowing what his nieces and nephews and his own son is being subjected to in the school systems. Again, what he fights so hard to preserve are the freedoms that we have. So thank you again today. I hope I have educated you a little bit on the air testing. Again, it's so much to take in. I've just given you a little bit of the tentacles to it. Go to their website, air.org, and you'll find everything that I have put here before you, and you can read it for yourself. Again, I'm part of the organization, Florida Parents Rise. We do go around and educate people on this. We're working with legislation with many representatives here in the state of Florida and trying to get this out. So again, thank you so much for your time today. I appreciate it.